A quick note about negatives. In chapters 1 through 3, we used a raised negative sign in the book. I, however, always wrote it with the parenthesis around it. Now the book is going to start using my notation for everything. In this case, this one means subtraction or minus, and this one means a negative. They will still use red to help indicate negatives versus subtractions, but you have to be a little more careful. A quick note about negative fractions. When you have something like this, negative 3/4, this is not saying that the top and the denominator and the bottom are both negative. It's saying the fraction 3/4 is negative. Negatives just tell you that a number is less than 0 or to the left of 0. So this just says you have 3/4 to the left of 0, whereas this is positive 3/4. That just means you are 3/4 to the right of 0. Fractions are just numbers that are less than whole numbers, but they are still numbers and they can either be negative or positive. Now we will graph the fraction 2/5 on the number line. Here is a number line. 2/5 is a proper fraction, so it's going to be between 0 and 1, and it's positive, so it will be on the right of 0. First, we start with our denominator. Our denominator is 5, so between 0 and 1, we are going to need 5 equal parts. Notice we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 equal parts. However, we only added 4 dividers. That's because our last divider was already there. Now we want 2 of these 5 parts, so we're going to count 1, 2. Right here is 2/5. It's 2/5 of the way between 0 and 1. A quick note, this would be 1/5, this is 2/5, this is 3/5, this is 4/5, and this would be 5/5. But notice that 5/5, that fraction bar is just division, and 5 divided by 5 is 1. So 5/5 is 1. That is a good way to check if you have your dividers in the right spot. We have 1/5, 2/5, 3/5, 4/5, 5/5. 5/5 should be in the same location as 1. Graph the fraction negative 4/5 on the number line. 4/5 is proper. It is negative, so it will be between 0 and negative 1. Again, our denominator is 5, so we need 5 equal parts. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we want to be at the 4th part. 1, 2, 3, 4. So right there, this dot represents negative 4/5. And again, the negative just tells you you're to the left of 0. Finding absolute values. Example, find each absolute value. We have the absolute value of 1/2 and the absolute value of negative 1/2. Remember, absolute values are just asking you how far away a number is from 0. Here is 0. Positive 1/2 is a half space to the right. Negative 1/2 is a half space to the left. But in both cases, they are only a half a space away from 0. So the absolute value of 1/2 is 1/2, and the absolute value of negative 1/2 is also 1/2. Remember, absolute value doesn't matter whether you're on the left or the right. It's just asking you how far, and they're always going to be positive answers. Lastly, objective 5, write equivalent fractions. There are many ways to represent the fraction 1/2. On a number line, we would start at 0, and 1/2 is exactly halfway between 0 and 1. Notice this is 1/2, this would be 2 halves. 2 divided by 2 is 1. Another way to represent a half would be with fourths. If you took 0 and 1 and divided it into 4 equal parts, 1, 2, 3, 4, when you are at the second part, you would also be halfway to 1. We could do the same thing with eighths and sixteenths. In all cases, we're at the same location between 0 and 1, but we can represent them with different fractions: 1/2, 2/4, 4/8, and 8/16. This is an example of an equivalent fraction. All 4 fractions represent the same number. The difference is how many pieces the 1 has been divided into. Here, 0 to 1, we're dividing it into 2 pieces. Here, we're dividing it into 4 pieces. It's kind of like if you have a pizza. If you wanted to, you could just cut the pizza into 2 pieces, and you would eat one big giant piece and your friend would eat the other big giant piece. Or you could take that one pizza and divide it into 4 slightly smaller pieces. If you ate 2 of those pieces, you're still eating half of the pizza. You just broke them up into smaller chunks. You could take that one pizza and cut it into as many slices as you wanted. You're just doing bigger slices versus smaller slices, but at a certain point you could still eat the same amount of pizza. Equivalent fractions are fractions that represent the same number. It's the same point on a number line. In order to write an equivalent fraction, there are two ways to do it. You can either multiply the top and the bottom of the fraction by the same number to get a new fraction, or you can divide the top and the bottom by the same number. The key is that you're using the same number. It is very important that you show me, as your teacher, what number you're using. So you have to write multiply top and bottom by the same number, or divide top and bottom by the same number. Notice how it's written twice. You cannot, and I cannot emphasize this enough, you cannot just write it once. That has a completely different meaning, which we will get into in later sections. But the top and the bottom both have to be multiplied or divided by the same number. It's like when we did our algebra and we had an equation and you had to do the same thing to both sides of the equation. It's the same idea. Math is all about balance. You have to do the same thing to the top and the bottom, and you have to write it down on a piece of paper that you're doing the same thing to the top and the bottom. Example, write -1/2 as an equivalent fraction with a denominator of 16. We're going to keep the negative sign the entire while through, because the fact that it's negative does not change. What's changing is that we want our denominator to be 16. We can turn 2 into 16 by multiplying by 8. In order to maintain our equality, we need to do the same thing to the top. 1 times 8 is also 8. So we have -8/16, and again it's still a negative. Write 12/15 as an equivalent fraction with a denominator of 5. Now we're going the other direction. We want to get 15 to be smaller. We want 12/15 to be something over 5. We turn 15 into 5 by dividing by 3. In order to maintain our balance, we have to do the same thing to the top. So if I'm dividing 15 by 3, I also have to divide 12 by 3. 12 divided by 3 is 4. Therefore, 12/15 is equivalent to 4/5. A few extra things about fractions. Notice when the top and the bottom of a fraction are the same, except for 0, it's the equivalent of 1. This is because fractions are just division. 6 divided by 6 is 1, so 6/6 is 1. -4 divided by -4 is also 1. Notice how it is a positive. You had a negative divided by a negative. That is a positive. This is different than this bottom example. Here, if you divide by 1, you just get whatever the numerator is. 6 divided by 1 is 6. Here, I have a negative and then a 12 divided by 1. It is sometimes helpful to think of this as a -1 times 12/1. This negative is not part of either the numerator or the denominator. It's part of the entire number. 12 divided by 1, which is 12. The answer stays negative. Notice the difference between these two. Students have a hard time seeing that these are different. If you have questions on this, please contact me and we can talk more about it. Example, simplify the fraction 5/5 by dividing the numerator by the denominator. 5/5 is the same as 5 divided by 5, which is equal to 1. Therefore, 5/5 is the same as 1. Simplify -12/4 by dividing. -12/4 is the same as just -12 divided by 4. 12 divided by 4 is 3, so since it was just a negative in front of it, we just keep that negative. -12/4 is equivalent to -3. A quick note. The title of this chapter is Rational Numbers, Positive and Negative Fractions. Rational numbers are numbers that can be written in the form a/b, where a and b are integers and b is not 0. In example 8c above, you saw that an integer can be written in the form a/b. 6 can be written as 6/1. What that means is that all integers can be written as fractions. So rational numbers contain both the fractions and all of our integers. We'll work more with things like decimals in Chapter 5. That concludes Section 4.1. Your next steps are to complete the worksheet for Section 4.1, then check the key for that worksheet or come to class and we'll go over it, and then lastly do the online homework for Section 4.1.